Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is LaChance. I am the Practice Growth Partner here at Lane Gorman Trubit, and I am happy to welcome you to our second webinar of 2022. Today's webinar is the second installment of our 8-part series called Aiming Towards Success. Today, we'll be discussing the 7 areas of cybersecurity with Keith Barthold. We're excited to be offering a diverse selection of webinars in 2022. Looking down the list of attendees today, I see lots of familiar faces and friends, which is great. But for those of you who are new, just a quick little bit about the firm. LGT is one of the largest single office firms in the Southwest, offering all sorts of financial and consulting services, including assurance services, a very robust tax group. Our consulting group does due diligence, bookkeeping services, CFO by the hour, fractional services, budgeting and forecasting, and we also have financial advisory. These events are designed to help your businesses grow and thrive. We cover a broad range of topics that are impactful to businesses in the construction, manufacturing and distribution, auto dealer services, real estate services, and not-for-profit industries. And this year, we want to make sure we're providing you topics that are more relevant to the work that you do. So please fill out the evaluation at the end of the event and be sure to utilize the comment section for your suggestions. The webinar will also be available as a recording within 2 business days following the event. The link on our YouTube page can be found on our resource page and also on social media. Speaking of social media, as we go through the presentation today, please feel free to share your attendance with us on your favorite social platform, either tagging us or using the hashtag #OneLGT. If you have questions about this or any of the services that we'd like to set up a free consultation to determine how we can help you and your company, please send us an email to askus@lgt-cpa.com. All of the links for everything I just mentioned will be included in the chat for you as well. This is a continuing professional education event, and you will receive 1 hour of CPE credit upon completion of the evaluation. Following the webinar, you will receive an email from Prolera, our CPE record keeper, to fill out a survey and receive a CPE certificate. Please take the survey to gain access to the presentation material as well as your CPE certificate. We're holding it hostage. We want your feedback. You do not have to have a Prolera account in order to fill out the form. After the evaluations are completed, CPE certificates will be delivered to you via email that you use for registration. Please submit any questions during the presentation using the Q&A function in the lower part of your screen. These will be answered during the presentation and at the end of the live webinar. So that's it for the housekeeping. I'm actually very happy to introduce our speaker for today. Keith is the founder and CEO of DKB Innovative, an award-winning managed services and managed security services provider. While establishing DKB Innovative, Keith enjoyed a 10-plus-year career at Perot Systems, Dell Services, with a number of notable accomplishments, including growing a $20 million application portfolio and leading delivery for Tenet Healthcare's hospital EMR and patient management applications. His most recent accolades include leading infrastructure transformation and the IT service delivery for Tenet's acquisition and onboarding of more than 700 providers at more than 150 physicians' practices, outpatient clinics, and ambulatory surgical care centers, while supporting the revenue stream of 60 hospitals. A proven, highly motivated leader and visionary with a tenacious passion for producing extraordinary results, a strong customer-focused delivery, and applied technical and business expertise to drive the business goals, including operational efficiency, revenue growth, and enhanced profitability at both Fortune 500 and small to medium-sized businesses. I'm very happy to welcome the man, the myth, and the legend, and my very good friend, Keith Barthold.
Thanks, Lucas. That's like the longest red carpet introduction I've ever gotten.
I do what I can.
All right. Well, let's just dive right in. We'll start now. I'll give you a little bit of introduction to DKB Innovative and what we're about. So the company that grows with you. You'll notice a space theme throughout here. We try to keep it fun and lively here. So we're a managed services provider, an MSP, and also a managed security services provider, an MSSP. And so what that means is that we're able to really serve all of your IT needs as a small to medium business. Some of the clients we serve in over 50 companies in our portfolio of companies that we're servicing, including healthcare, nonprofit, energy, construction and construction related, manufacturing and financial services industries. And so most of those companies where there are complex IT and security needs, we're in there serving them. 18 years in business, serving greater DFW area, and then with clients nationally and internationally. Maybe we'll have a client on Mars one of these days. We'll see. 50 employees at this point. We are, I think, 5 years in a row on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list, and continue to really push the growth. So I'll dive right into our presentation, and
Well, Keith, we do have a question already that's come up through the chat.
Okay.
We hear a lot of reports on the news of large companies that experience these data breaches. Why is cybersecurity so important for small and medium-sized businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Unfortunately, it is the big companies that you see that get the media attention. In speaking with the FBI and our relationships there, they estimate that it could be as high as 85% of the cyber crimes that aren't reported. Let's face it, like if you get hit with ransomware, if there's a data breach, that's bad news if it gets to media attention. So there's a lot of work to sort of suppress that, take care of it, keep it on the down low. And so we just don't hear about these major attacks. But the reality is the majority of the attacks are small to medium-sized businesses. And that's not because of like a nation state attack or a very guided attack to say you're a high profile target, we're coming after you. It's really the business model of ransomware being launched and tools that are are out there to enable a hacker to really take a shotgun approach and get as many victims as possible, and then steal as much data, infect with as much ransomware as possible. And so they're really indiscriminate. And unfortunately, you're as a small business, your security controls and maturity is just, it's not at bank level, right? It doesn't need to be. It's not Fort Knox. And so you become a very easy target because of that shotgun blast to get as many victims as possible and bring you in. And so, we've only seen that within the past 5 years, and increasingly the past 2 years, where those economics have worked out that way. So I would say as a small business, yeah, you are a big target. You weren't a target 5 years ago, but it's a real threat now.
Yep.
So just jump right in here and go, why is cybersecurity important? Well, for one thing, cybercrime is up 600%. And it's a staggering statistic that in 2020, industry professionals really, they estimate, law enforcement estimates that there was about $1 trillion worth of damages and gain taken within the cybercrime industry. Fast forward to last year, 2021, that it shot up to 6 trillion. So in 1 year, you go from 1 trillion, right? And where the world is already suffering because of the pandemic in 2020 to 2021, you see 6 trillion. We can only imagine that that's going to rise even more this year, especially with nation state attacks and what we see going on with Russia and Ukraine and the conflict in Eastern Europe and all of the cyber attacks occurring and the sophistication of hackers and their tool sets. It's on the rise, and so it's a bigger risk now than it ever has been. And so fundamentally, that's why it's so important. Some other big drivers there we need to think about is compliance, and that could be regulatory. Biden, of course, a few weeks ago signed into law the requirements for U.S. critical infrastructure to report those breaches, and to because honestly, like I said, up to 85% of these breaches weren't even being reported. And so now they're putting that into law. We can only imagine that is hitting more and more industries. Financial services, healthcare already have some of these regulations, but that's going to start hitting all industries where there's a compliance requirement. Of course, regulations like PCI and GLBA, HIPAA for healthcare, more and more of that. So cybersecurity is really important because of that. Also, maybe it's not regulatory, but it's contractual. Your clients are getting smarter and smarter about this, and they need to protect their data. And so if you're working with client data, your clients may put enforcement verbiage in their contracts to say, look, if you're going to serve us, if you're going to work with our data, you've got to have a certain level of cybersecurity controls in place, a certain level of maturity, and that just makes sense for your client safety. Another big driver is insurance. We're seeing this insurance reform, and it makes sense when insurance payers are having to pay off ransoms on these giant ransomware attacks. It's starting to add up, and like insurance in any industry, reform has to occur. And I hear a lot of people say, well, that's not right. Insurance shouldn't be affecting the way we do business. That's really the way it's always been. I mean, our office building has sprinklers in it, right? And insurance has a lot to do with that. And you see, as there are damages occurring, and you see this, of course, in engineering, buildings collapse. What happens? Well, insurance steps in first and says, whoa, if we're going to cover this, we're going to have some standards in place, and we've got to have safety up to a certain level. And then regulation and the government usually steps in behind that. And we're seeing the same thing happen here, is really that insurance reform. So you have to have minimum standards of cybersecurity controls put in place to continue to have cyber insurance. The business impact, I want to highlight this, is the formula for that is risk equals business impact times likelihood. And so what's important is that security really be a function of risk management. And we're looking to go, what do I need to put in place, and what do I need to invest in to identify what my risks are, but then manage them. And a lot of that comes down to assets. You need to, and we'll talk about this more later, but you need to understand, what are your assets? What are the devices, your people assets? Where is the information? So what is it that I need to protect? And what am I protecting that from? Does it need to be, is it confidentiality of that information? Is it integrity? Is it the availability of that information, just that it's there? And so these are all the topics that we'll really dive into. From an agenda standpoint, very quickly, what we're going to cover there is we're going to talk about the tools to visualize that risk. We're going to talk through planning and prioritizing. And that's really one of the most important things here, is understanding what is that risk, and then what is my game plan to manage it. We want to go through 7 areas of cybersecurity, which of course is the title of this presentation. We've distilled that into some key areas to really simplify it, to go, these are focus areas that you need to look at to protect your business. And then quantify security maturity with the scorecard. And one of the things that we'll provide at the end of this presentation review is a scorecard we're providing for all attendees to quickly self-assess, and just to see where you're at in terms of security maturity for your organization.
Great.
All right.
Well, I see the next slide is your introduction to frameworks. How important is it to have the right framework or the right design for your IT environment?
Yeah, it's really important because it has to match the needs of your business.
Okay.
Right. So as an example, if you're in retail, you're not going to select HIPAA as a compliance. You're not going to select ISO 27001, which is more for international and more manufacturing focus. You want to fit the compliance need and pick the framework that best fits your business.
Okay.
There's a lot of these, and I've listed a few of those here. CMMC and NIST. You see that a lot of that is government driven and the regulation behind that. Financial services has adopted a lot of the NIST regulation. PCI is, of course, payment card industry for companies that are relying on a lot of credit card transactions. Others here, ISO 27001, SOC 2. There's a lot of regulation, and sometimes it's really difficult in just selecting what is that framework, because you've got to have that foundation if you're going to be working in that framework. What you don't want to do is work, and do all this planning and then go, oh, we selected the wrong framework. And so now it's rework and a bunch of additional effort. And so we're a big advocate of CIS, Center for Internet Security. And so what I'll do in later slides is really talk about why CIS is a great pick as a framework that meets the needs of many different organizations, in part because you can crosswalk. So it's assess and plan once, and then crosswalk to your needs, no matter what type of organization that you have or what your needs are. So another thing I want to talk about, we'll see some slides coming up, is what is the cyber defense matrix? Really, there's a few different matrices in here that we can look at, and we can use those to organize and measure. And so jumping right into the why on that is to create some visualization of the intangible. Cybersecurity is like, if you look at it on the surface, with all its complexity and all the moving pieces, it can easily be overwhelming. And sometimes it sort of becomes an art instead of a science. And that's a bad thing. Like, you want to make it a lot more scientific and a lot more objective versus subjective, with consistency and being able to break that down into bite-sized chunks, measure against that, and really measure what your risk is. And then be able to identify the gaps, because I think it's easy if you're a security practitioner, if you're an IT director out there, if you work in a specific environment, you sort of get blinders, and you get this bias that, oh, I'm working on this all the time, it's fine. Well, you may have gaps there. So by using checklists, by using process and matrices, you're able to really drill down and understand where my gaps are. And then the final thing is prioritization for resource allocation. It's a balance, right? Figuring out what level of secure is good enough. And obviously, a construction company just building houses is going to have one security need, and that need's going to be very different from a hospital or a bank. And you've got to figure out, like, how much do I want to spend here? What's appropriate? Because if I run the construction practice like I run a bank, then you're wasting a lot of money, and you're going to lose very quickly, because this adds up and gets expensive.
Yeah.
So I'll jump right in, and it certainly stop me if there's any questions that come up from the audience. Let's talk about the asset threat matrix and start there. I think a lot of questions I get is like, where do I even start? Like, I know I've got cybersecurity needs. Like, how do I just get started and figure out where to go? And this asset threat matrix is a great way to do that. What you're doing is basically listing out your assets on the left here. As you can see in this example, phones, mobile phones, workstations, network, email. What are the assets? And then what is the need behind that in terms of confidentiality, integrity, and availability? And so, this is cybersecurity, but it's also IT. Thinking about and sort of prioritizing things. As an example, you may look at business data and go, well, yeah, like, business data is absolutely important. Everything about it's important. Well, there's really a priority here, because if I take something like a tax return or a financial statement, integrity of that, making sure someone didn't change the numbers, is probably more important than the confidentiality. Confidentiality is still really important, but if I had to pick one, probably going to pick integrity, right? And then availability, not having access to that data, that's bad, but it's not nearly as bad as someone changing the data. And so breaking that down, it really helps you to sort of get the picture of where do I need to put my focus. Right. So we're prioritizing and justifying the remediation and the effort and the cost. How far do I want to go in securing this? And then we're really setting up that foundation for cyber defense strategy. So we've got, the first thing to think about with a problem is just identifying what is the problem, and how am I going to protect it? Why am I going to protect it? So this is a really good place to start.
Great.
So another introduction here, to take this a little further, is the cyber defense matrix. And so Sunil, you actually got to have dinner with him, the creator of this, a few weeks ago. And what this does is it allows you to take the NIST framework, which is made up of 5 categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And it allows you to drop in and categorize the services and the things that you're doing. I'll show you on the next slide where I've got this pre-filled and sort of simplified. But you think about things like antivirus or EDR. Where does that fit? What is the purpose of that tool? Well, the purpose of that tool would be protect and detect. And I'm applying that to my devices, because you're not going to install EDR on your firewall. That's going to be a different type of technology. And so you're identifying those areas of technology and putting them in their place, and know that as you get further from left to right, it becomes more about the people element than it does the technology. Like, I could put a technology in that identifies and inventories all my devices on the left. But can I just put a tool in place that recovers my data automatically? Well, no, you got to think about process and the people element of walking you through that as you get further to the right. So it's a different set of complexities. So the next slide is really breaking that down and sort of simplifying it to go, here are the technologies or the processes that I have in place. And there's a lot, right? You see things like vulnerability management, firewall, multi-factor authentication, pen testing, EDR, XDR. So you take all those technologies and capabilities that you have within your organization, and you lay them out. And so really it's a way to visualize what is it that I'm doing to protect my assets, and where are my gaps? So if suddenly, like, we haven't thought about response and incident response, like what if ransomware occurred, what would we do? What is the process behind that? Well, this matrix really helps you to identify, to go, okay, we haven't put any thought into that. Maybe we need to put some plans in place. So if this happens, we have a checklist, and we're not scrambling around not knowing what to do.
Yeah. So Keith, there's the old adage that an ounce of protection is worth a pound of cure. If you're looking at your defense matrix like this, would it make sense to focus on those earlier, those earlier steps, the identify and the protect and detect, as opposed to once an event happens, then you're looking at responding and recovering, which I would imagine would be more expensive, or at least more visible in terms of damage reputationally.
Yeah, absolutely, Lucas. The pieces to the components to the left are proactive in nature, and the pieces to the right are more reactive in nature. Yes, prevention is the key, right? But at the same time, we also have to assume breach. We have to assume that every safe that's ever been created can be cracked, given enough time and big enough explosives, right? And so it's a continuous cat and mouse game. So you have to assume at some point there's going to be attack, and it's a matter of how fast do you respond to it and can you recover. I think a next slide probably illustrates that even better, and I'll introduce a couple of concepts here. One is the terms left of boom and right of boom. And that boom is the security event. And look, the reality is that again, and I'll repeat, in any organization, given enough time, right, and the proper motivation from the bad actors here, the bad guys, they will get into your environment. What you want to do is minimize damage when that happens. And so it's the same thing with a building and securing a building. If I have valuables in that building, sure, I'm going to lock the doors. I'm going to put a fence around it. I'm going to try to keep people on the outside. Does that mean that I'm not going to put security cameras and alarm system in place? No. I'm also going to complement these layers of security with an alarm system, with a camera system in the inside, so that if and when an intruder gets in, they can't live off the land and hide in the closet and pop out every night and do more damage without me knowing about it. Right. It works the same way in a network environment. If there's not detection and if there's not a response, when an attacker gets in, they will live off the land and do more and more damage. Maybe they're exfiltrating that data and sending it out, and then working to manipulate your employees from the inside. If they get in and you can immediately see that, the alarm goes off and I can get them out of your environment, you minimize damage.
Yep.
And so in terms of reactive and proactive, you are sort of, even the things to the right of boom, you are being proactive by proactively planning for that to happen, and putting your plans and your technology around that. And the simplest thing is backups, right? Backups are really, you're proactively putting data backups in place to minimize the damage when a reactive type event happens by recovering.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a couple different frameworks, NIST, HIPAA. Is there a framework that you would recommend where the industry itself is unregulated? That's actually one of the questions that came up in the chat too. Is there a framework that is kind of a multi-purpose, but not necessarily industry specific, that someone could utilize?
Absolutely, and that framework, the answer to that is CIS, Center for Internet Security. This is a framework that works closely with all of the other frameworks. Like, they're in close communication with NIST, with all of your different government frameworks, with PCI, all those regulated. And so with this close relationship, what it allows you to do is, one, it allows you to measure cybersecurity maturity. You can use it to score yourself on a scale of 0 to 5 based on how much of this you have implemented. You can also identify gaps, allocate resources where they're most impactful. We talked about that in planning, as the importance of going, here are where my gaps are. This is where I need to focus my time. This is an area that I'm really good at, and we've got some great technology and great process. I'm not going to invest any more time on that. I'm going to work on these other areas where maybe we've got some gaps and some holes in our strategy. And it allows you just to order the priority and sort of gauge that, am I secure enough? And so maybe for construction, maybe manufacturing, having a 1.0 or 1.5 is good enough on that scale. But if I'm a bank, if I have Department of Defense contracts and I'm in the supply chain for weapons systems and regulated information that I'm dealing with, then I need to be closer to a 3.0 for that. And so I think it's a very universal framework, and it's good for those unregulated industries like you're talking about, and even regulated because you can crosswalk. So we'll take a little bit deeper dive into that. Let's talk about some of the particulars of CIS and what CIS calls critical security controls, or CSCs. And there's 18 of those. We'll dive here in a moment to talk about those. I want to first introduce sort of this measurement, right? I mentioned from really 0 to having serious gaps, from 1.0 to 5.0 from a measurement scale. What it does is, of each of these 18 areas, those individually get measured to understand, well, what is your maturity in that specific area and what percentage of controls are implemented. And then you aggregate all of that data together to give you a score. And so certainly what we do with our clients is go in, assess their environment, and then give them a score based on the assessment. And again, it's there's a lot of science to this. So we can be consistent. And if we assess you or another company assesses you, hopefully it should come up with the same score. But we can look at that and go, well, this is where we have a problem. We've decided as an organization we need to be at a 3.0. We're at a 2.0 now. What are the things that I need to do? What are the actions and the roadmap, and what do the investments look like to get me from 2.0 to 3.0? And as you can see, that's from 1 to 5 sort of shows that level of maturity. So if we look at a screenshot of our assessment tool and what we use, this is just one of those CIS controls. The first one is inventory and control of enterprise assets. The reason this is number 1 is, well, it's foundational. Like, how can you secure something that you don't know about? Again, going back to the analogy of a house, if I'm securing a house or a building and I don't know where the doors are, and I don't know where the crown jewels are in that building, it's really hard to secure it, right? And so you've got to identify what it is first. So that starts with asset inventory systems, identification of your applications, of your data flows and where the data is at and what is it. And so you go through these 5 safeguards with sub controls under that, and score those, and score them based on, is there policy around it? Is the control implemented? And then are we enforcing that? Like, do we have technical controls in place that would enforce it? As an example, maybe if this would for password policy, maybe you've got a rule and everyone has to have 12-character passwords. But if there's no enforcement and you're allowing people to use five-letter passwords, then there's a misalignment. The policy doesn't match, the control doesn't match how it's technically enforced. The last category there is, how is this control reported to the business? Like, do I have evidence? So if I had an auditor auditing this, how could I provide evidence to show that auditor that we satisfy that? So that just kind of give you a big picture of what this looks like and how we assess and how useful that is. How it rolls up together is it categorizes and into all of those controls. And so you can see at the very bottom, critical security controls, CSC number 1 through 18. You can see for this particular example, I'm working off memory here, but I think CSC number 14 is training. And so for this particular example, they're doing a great job training their people. But there are some other gaps here, like CSC number 1 is inventory, 45%, but maybe they don't have very good inventory systems. So for this particular client, I would say, let's not invest anything additional in training. Let's focus on these areas where they're low. And maybe some of those areas like number 18, which is pen testing, that's a lower priority and it's not important to that organization. And so they can accept the fact that they're at 0%. So it's really about having clarity and insight into your environment. And that's what this allows you to do, and do it in a very objective manner. So sort of building on that, CIS implementation groups further take down and take these 18 controls and the 174 some odd safeguards, sub-controls, if you will, under each of them. And CIS prescribes an order of importance here, an order of priority. And that's really important because, again, security is all about ordering. You know, my analogy going back to like protecting a home, I'm not going to hire an armed guard and build a 12-foot fence around the property before I lock the doors, right? Putting good locks and putting a checklist in place to say, I'm going to make sure every one of my doors is locked at night between these hours. That's pretty cheap. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper than those other controls. So there is there's an order that needs to be followed. And so what this does is it breaks it down into those, into 3 implementation groups. And you'll see some of those, like in the lower right-hand corner, control 18 penetration testing, there is 0 in implementation group 1. So they're saying, look, there are other things to worry about that are more important before you get to that control and get to penetration testing. So I think this slide probably best illustrates that, is that you get maximum effectiveness out of those initial implementation group 1 controls. And so it's sort of like that 80-20 rule or Pareto principle, right? Is that you get 80% effectiveness out of 20% of the effort. Same here. To be most cost effective and to be most effective in managing risk and in putting security in place, by putting these 56 safeguards instead of all 174, just put the first 56 in place. You can see here statistically the impact that you're having on the top 5 attacks of malware, ransomware, web app hacking, insider privilege, and misuse, targeted intrusions. We're getting into almost the 80 percentile and above just by putting these safeguards. And as you get into IG2, a little bit more advanced, IG3, really sophisticated security, it's going to get much more expensive, and that percentage improvement goes down. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay. So you're a business owner. I'm a partner at the firm, which technically makes me a business owner as well. And so at this point, I'm fairly well terrified because you've given us a lot of great information. Where, as a leader in an organization, where should we start? What do you think is the foundation principle?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've put together 7 sort of highlighted areas. Okay. Taking all this information from CIS and just the trends that we've seen and these ordered approach, highlighted just 7 areas that this is by no means comprehensive, right? And every business, every organization being unique is going to have unique needs. But by and large, these are 7 areas where it would be wise to put some focus on that align as well with the survey or the tool that we're going to give you at the end of this webinar. So the first here is employee training and policy. Why? Well, the why is because humans are flawed, right? we make mistakes and we're easily manipulated, and social engineering can bypass all technical controls. And so the need there is for ongoing employee testing and training. And some of these link together. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to like email protection, but to not only train, but also to test and reinforce that training. If we said, here, go through this and go through this checklist and sign off that you did it, well, that really doesn't stick. and that employee doesn't really have any motivation to really paying attention and embracing those things that we're teaching, it's got to be a little bit more than that. We've got to test their competency, and we'll talk through a few different ways you can do that. Also, just having acceptable use policy and having that planned out, right? To have that sort of gets into an HR function. And it's where HR and IT and security collide, but we want to very, very clearly put some parameters in place so employees know what's okay and how they can use your organization's assets and network, and what's not. And then with that training, measure it, improve it, repeat. It's not a one-time deal, it's a process, but it's very, very important. And you see statistically these the effectiveness of attacks really is decreased, and the frequency, the damages inflicted go down as your people are better and better trained.
You mentioned email and social engineering, and as a matter of fact, one of my clients suffered a loss through spear phishing and social engineering that was perpetrated through email. We all use email every day. How will you know if you've been a victim of social engineering or something that's been perpetrated through email?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Like, how will you know? That sort of gets into the next slide. Is it's about teaching each of your employees to recognize, one, that there is an attack, that this is a phishing email. I'm being socially engineered here, and to recognize, like, what does that look like when it occurs, right? Phishing is getting tougher and tougher because the criminals here are getting more and more advanced in that. And it's become the number one attack surface. And part of that is it's very, very cheap, right? Like you can be attacked. And we talked about at the beginning of the webinar, that shotgun approach. A hacker, a cyber criminal, can push out millions and millions of email with next to no cost. And so of course they do that. Maybe they send out 1 million phishing emails and they get 1 or 2 victims. We look at that and go, well, that's a really low percentage win rate. Well, no, it didn't cost them anything to do that. And so that's a big win for them. So how you do that is that ongoing education, but also a few techniques. Formal policy and technical controls, one, educating on what we will send and what we'll allow into our environment. A simple one is just, blocking Office documents that have macros in them, blocking executables. It sounds really simple, but like you're blocking that out and you're not even letting it into your network, into your email system, to even get to a point to where one of your employees falls prey, and filtering attacks and spam. And so a lot of this, majority of businesses today are using Office 365. Some are still using Gmail, and a few, on the Gmail Google Business. But in both of these platforms, especially Office 365, it's not just a matter of just setting it up and letting it go. Your IT director, your cybersecurity firm need to go in and configure and continuously adjust controls to block out that spam and block out that attack. SPF, DMARC, DKIM, these are all very technical, but they're controls that you put in place to ensure that the email you're getting in is not malicious and people are who they say they are, and they're not they're not spoofing that. That's that enforcing the integrity piece. And the last thing, and probably the most important, really relates to my last slide, is the phishing tests. Mm-hmm. Really, really important. What this is your security, your IT team are continuously sending out phishing emails and trying to trap people and trying to trick people into clicking that. Much better that you fall victim to that than a real attacker, right? And so what it does is it creates that muscle memory. It creates a healthy paranoia. And I will tell you, like my team, they do this against me continuously. And I have a real paranoia of giving my security team a win. And there have been several times. The one that almost got me was your Disney account has almost expired, and I went in and looked at that, and I'm like, okay, I've got a 4-year-old daughter, and if she doesn't have her princess content streaming, right, that would be a disaster for the household. And I almost clicked it, right, and the last minute I went, wait a second, why is this coming to me? And hovered over the link and looked at it and went, okay, now they're trying to test me, or they're trying to phish me. But that muscle memory is so important to make that part of your culture and to implement that in your organization.
Keith, we have a question that came in through the Q&A. The question is, it relates to the training. What's a reasonable time period for updating training for your employees?
So I think it should always be moving, right? You should not push the same training out over and over, like, because it just gets stale. And let's face it, all of us have had to attend mandatory training to where it's the same thing. And when you go through it the second time, you just go click, click, click. Yeah, I already know the answer to this question. I already did this once. You don't really pay attention. You got to keep it alive. And that's the advantage of using a firm like DKB, or outsourcing that to others out there that can create fresh content and then put the right sequence that's in place. Maybe it's an hour per quarter, 30 minutes per quarter. Maybe it's really quick, small training every single month over the course of the year. But and that just is going to depend on sort of the culture and the needs of your organization.
Okay, great. So you'd mentioned safeguarding your own assets, which of course makes a lot of sense, but also, like our firm and lots of other organizations also store external information, client information. Not-for-profits store donor lists with contact information and perhaps credit card information. How do you handle storing customer data of sorts?
Yeah, so it's really important to understand what data you have, right? That's part of that identification. What is the sensitivity of the data? And the very first matrix that we showed you to look at that data in terms of the confidentiality requirements, integrity requirements, availability of that, and then back it up, like assume that it's going to be breached and that it's going to be stolen, that it's going to be attacked and it's not going to be available. This is your fallback. So continuous backup of data and configurations, restore testing, and then a formal disaster recovery plan. So it's not just about having the technology in place, but you got to figure out, like, if worst comes to worst and I've got to restore data, how long is it going to take to recover? How far can I go back? Do I have systems that I'm going to be able to spin this back up on? And think about that, because maybe that's not the case for all of your critical systems, or sorry, all your systems and all your data, but maybe you have a subset that is mission critical data systems. I've got to get to this in order to operate. That's what you need to prioritize. And that's what you need to think about, very quick recovery and access to that data.
One thing I notice when we visit our clients, we have to get an understanding of their internal control environment, and then often it also includes understanding their IT environment. And they will often say very proudly that they do back up their data. But my follow-up question is always, okay, great, what was the last time you restored it? And it's always the deer in the headlights look. Like, that's always, it feels to me like that's always the forgotten piece is, yes, that's great that you've backed up your data, but how often are you testing that restore function?
Yeah, no, that I 100% agree. Is like you've got to have a combination of technical controls in place that are ensuring that data has been backed up and are alerting your team when it's not. and to be able to have process in place, test it, like you said, and measure. So is this right?
Right.
Do I need to invest more in this because I need to recover it faster, or is that good enough?
Okay. Well, and I saw the next slide, which is going to be a question I was going to ask too, and that is, we talk about vulnerability through email, but what about vulnerabilities through your company's website?
Yeah, so I think, this is an area that people often overlook and go, well, like, what damage could a person really do through the website? Or,
Right.
yeah, we've got some apps out there, and they're accessible through the website, but just not putting focus on it. And it's really, really important because you can think about the reputation damage. Someone defaces your website, or you have controlled areas of your website where it's password protected. Can people get to that? And often we see vulnerabilities within the software itself. You have to, one, do the maintenance to keep those things up to date, because keep your SSL certificates current, make sure you're on the right hosting plans and securing that with regular updates, securing the server, but also understanding where you're exposed, like where there are open doors that are just out there to the internet, and how can I shut those down by putting things like reverse proxy in place, or putting geo blocking in place. That's a very easy one to go. I don't need people in Iran, in Syria, in Russia accessing the data that's available on my website. Like, can I restrict it down just to the US? Or if I do have business, in China, as an example, maybe I can restrict it to certain areas of that, or restrict portions and only make that part of the website accessible and the data that you expose out there. And that last piece is vulnerability management, OWASP. That's just testing for these vulnerabilities. And so you're continuously testing, you're running software to go, where do I have a hole? And those holes pop up all the time, right? And quickly get in there and patching it, fixing it.
Okay. So, and stepping back and kind of broadening scope a little bit, taking a look at your network overall, what are some of those common gaps that you see in the network design?
Yeah, so first and foremost, and this should just be in bold above all, is cyber hygiene. It is the continuous process of doing all of the right things to keep my environment secure. Maintenance, if you will, right? And so those are the things like patching the network devices. I've listed them here, thinking about the maintenance of your asset inventory, that vulnerability management, software updates and patches. Do I have the right firewalls in place? Are they maintained? Are they secured? Doing network scans to test that. Secure Wi-Fi access to make sure that you separately have a guest network. If you've got guests in your office, visitors, people that are outside of your office, you don't want them accessing your internal Wi-Fi and having direct access to your servers. And so what we're talking about here is really thinking about all of the layers and those cyber hygiene items that you need to keep going and check the box day in and day out to ensure your environment's within best practices and it's safe as a result.
Okay. Early on, you mentioned maybe some companies have a policy where your password has to be 12 characters long, but then they allow people to only have one that's 5. How important really are passwords and the design of that control?
Yeah, they're very important, right? So the phishing that we talked about, all of these data breaches and security events occurring as a result of phishing, typically email, it really goes hand in hand with that user security. Because if you fell victim to a phishing scam and you surrendered your password, well, if you had multi-factor authentication in place, that may not have been a problem. If you used people that where there's a data breach and there's theft of passwords on a system. LinkedIn was breached years ago, right? If you're using the same password on LinkedIn as you also use to get into your line of business application, to get into your email and Office 365, and use one singular password for all of them, if one environment gets breached, then they all get breached because your password is stolen. So using long, complex passwords so someone can't just attack it with a dictionary attack and guess it, or run a program against it to brute force attack it, is really, really key. Auditing and disabling outdated accounts, right? So if you've got an account out there that has not been used, it's a service account, or an employee that was terminated and discipline didn't occur to shut that account off, often, those are the ones that get attacked because someone's got a long time to attack it. Nobody's watching it. It gets broken into. Obviously, avoid sharing accounts and passwords. It seems like a no-brainer, but if you're not educating your team on this and you're not putting policies in place, let's face it, passwords are hard to keep up with. And if people will default to reusing the same passwords over and over. And so you need to educate and teach people about that. The key one here, multi-factor authentication. Like anytime there is external access to your network, like a VPN, or access to critical information, such as Office 365, even accessing your LinkedIn account, right? Like you want multi-factor authentication in that, because if that password is compromised, then chances are if you've got MFA in place, you're still going to be safe. Okay. And so it's very, very important, and something easy. It's inconvenient, but it's very easy to put in place. And then train employees to identify secure websites, right? Putting controls in place to block out dangerous websites, but also teaching them to identify what's secure and what's not.
Perfect. All right, we are coming up on the top of the hour, so I'm going to turn it over to you for the last area, number 7, and then if you'll close us out.
You bet. So number 7 here is endpoint security. We talked about all sort of all of the broad topics around network security and training and reducing risk in your environment. Just this endpoint security has become so important now more than ever, especially within the past 2 years, because now you've got work from home, you've got flexibility, and most of your employees have that option. They expect to be able to take their laptop with them and work when they need to remotely. And so now suddenly you've got all of these laptops that a few years ago, maybe they were in a protected environment with a firewall in front of them. They were secured in your office. Now they're at people's homes. Now they're out in hotels. They're out in coffee shops. Very, very important here to have next generation antivirus and EDR, that's endpoint detection and response. The days of the old McAfee and Symantec antivirus on their own are really gone. There are very sophisticated attacks out there requiring the use of more advanced tools that need to be in place. DNS Content Filtering is another one. That's really protecting, keeping the bad websites out of your environment. And that's helpful from an HR standpoint, but it's also helpful to ensure that malicious websites, people just can't get to them on their corporate assets. Of course, patching, removing admin access. Like if we can reduce the access people have so they can't accidentally install something malicious, that helps. And then having auto lock screens and automatic logouts. So if a person leaves their computer for 5 minutes or more, it locks it out. And the last thing is assumed theft, like having full disk encryption in place so that if there's protected data on that laptop, on that asset, and it gets stolen, you're not having to report those issues. That data is safe because it's been encrypted. And so a few key questions here are just, how can you identify a malware threat? Well, it's hard if you don't have these tools and these training in place. And then assume breach. So identify the root cause of initial point of compromise. So if there is an attack, let's very quickly be able to identify where that came from so we can patch the holes and make sure that that doesn't happen again. Because often if a house gets robbed, then there's more robbers lining up. They're going to try to hit it a second time and get it a third time if you don't do a really good job securing it. And so the last slide here, I'll throw out here is this cybersecurity scorecard we've been talking about. Wanted to inform all attendees that if they're registered, the email that they will receive a link to DKB Innovative's scorecard, so you can run through and you can score just kind of where you're at. We're always there for questions. If you have any questions, our contact information be out there. If you're running across any questions in this and go, wow, I really didn't score good here, and I'd like some recommendations on how I can improve in this area, like that. That's what we're here for. Lucas can certainly assist with that and get you in touch with us as well.
Absolutely. We've also added the link to that in the chat. So it'll be going out to folks that are attending via email, but also it's available now if they want to click on the link too.
Great.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Keith, thank you so much for taking time out and spending an hour with us and kind of giving us the rundown on cybersecurity. It's always a concern as a business owner, and now I have a laundry list of things to do. So thanks for that.
Well, thanks for having me, Lucas.
Absolutely. Thanks again. We'll talk soon. And thank you, everybody. Be sure to sign up for the third one.